Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of YXC Underground. I'm your host, Eric Anderson. This episode is a continuation of last week's episode where we featured an incredible nonprofit organization here in Saskatoon called Empty Arms. It provides supports to individuals and families who have experienced the loss of a child during pregnancy or up to the age of 6. Jasmin, Herchak, and Briana Koop co-founded Empty Arms in 2015 and were the featured guests in last week's episode. They were amazing to speak with, and the feedback I've received from listeners sure highlights their empathy and kindness. I hope you get a chance to listen to their story if you haven't done so already. The other voices you heard in last week's episode belong to Dax and Sara Irons. They share the story of their son, Everett, who was born on September 22nd, 2018, and passed away at birth. They are grateful for the support Empty Arms provided them during such a difficult time, and in fact it was Sara's idea to feature Jasmin and Briana on the podcast. Sara and Dax invited me to their home on a chilly Saturday morning in December to talk about Everett and the supports Empty Arms provided them. It was a really powerful conversation, and I can't thank Sara and Dax enough for their honesty and vulnerability in sharing their story. I played a few minutes of our conversation in last week's episode, but I want to share with you the entire interview because I just found it so powerful in how it shows the impact Empty Arms has on people like Sara and Dax. I also wanted to share it because Sara and Dax gave so much of themselves in telling their story. I've known Sara for years through Saskatoon's yoga community, but this was the first time I met Dax, and he just shared so much of his heart in our conversation, and I'm really grateful to both of them for sharing so much. We did the interview in their living room. Dax and I sat on the couch while Sara sat cross-legged on the floor. On the coffee table in front of us were objects that were part of the Empty Arms package that you'll hear them discuss throughout the interview. Again, I am so grateful to Sara and Dax for sharing their story with me on the podcast.
I'm Sara Irons.
I'm Dax Irons.
And who would like to tell me about Everett?
I can start. Is that what you want? Yeah. So in 2018, we found out we were pregnant with our first baby together. And then at our 20-week scan, we got a call back saying there was something they needed to rescan. So we went for a second ultrasound. And after that ultrasound, one of the fetal medicine doctors came to speak to us and told us that there were problems with our baby that were incompatible with life. So then we had to make the decision of where to go from there, to carry to term or to induce labor then. But basically Everett was diagnosed with ventriculomegaly. Thank you.
Ventriculomegaly. It's a very rare condition. Well, really, there were two things. Basically, there's supposed to be separation of the ventricles in the brain, and that had not occurred. But he also had a massive amount of fluid in the skull cavity that prevented his brain from developing normally in the way that it should.
So upon getting that news, we talked to our doctor. We talked to my brother, who's a physician. I think he was our first call. Asked him kind of his opinion, what he would do. And we also then talked to our doula, Chantal Baltazar, who, when we called her, said, there's this organization called Empty Arms, and they can help you through this, because we had no idea what we were going to be walking into. And then from there, we made the appointment to induce labor and contacted Empty Arms, and Jasmin was, I don't know if it was assigned to us, but she arranged to come. She was the person we had contact with and arranged to come to the hospital once Everett was born to create a space where we could have some memories with Everett before we had to say goodbye.
The phone calls that you had with your doctor and with your brother and with your doula, what were those conversations like?
It was I don't know, I think for us it was partly just to walk through that initial trauma, right? Like you go through the steps, they ask the questions, and you kind of go over that moment again to help you process it, because I mean, it's so initially overwhelming having the doctor tell you that, you know, your baby will never function normally. Like, there was no, you know, they were unequivocally saying, you know, this, there is nothing we can do. There is no hope. There is no, and, you know, they were direct about it. And in a way, I can appreciate that now, but it was also a lot in the moment. So I think those conversations were more, you know, we weren't ever going to get a different answer. And I don't think we were really expecting or hoping for one. It was more, you know, you just have to walk through that to remind yourself of the decision that you have to make. I don't know. I know the doctor called me that night and talked to me for 45 minutes, which our family doctor is a wonderful man, and I don't think there are, you know, I know a lot of people who I don't think their family doctor would have done that. But it wasn't a medical conversation. It was more of a personal conversation. Yeah.
How quickly did everything happen from when the initial diagnosis to having Jasmin in the room with you? How quickly did everything happen?
The diagnosis happened on a Thursday morning. And then Thursday afternoon, our parents came up. My parents came up from Humboldt. Dax's folks came over. I think Tanner and Janelle, like my brother and sister-in-law, came as well. And we kind of all had some grieving time together, but we made the decision that night. Called the doctor, talked to our family doctor, who called. He wasn't even following the pregnancy anymore, because I was with a gynecologist, but talked to him, called the hospital, called Dr. Wesson, and...
Yeah, it was within 2 days.
Yeah. It's so interesting, Dax, just in terms of when you were describing the conversation with your family doctor, that it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't so much about like the medical, it was more just dealing with the news that you heard.
Yeah, and I was asking questions about the condition, making sure that I understood, because I felt like I had to process that. And I mean, you know, like, you ask him to look at a copy of the scans or whatever, and you know, but like, I mean, your options are, like, from a medical standpoint, it's more about what was best for Sara and what was best for us. And yeah, so, like, I mean, you talk about that, but yeah, it was more I remember more feeling like my doctor was just sympathizing with me and walking me through it. Like, you know, there was never any conversation about possible medical interventions, because there just wasn't anything. Yeah.
And our doctor had been with me. He's been my doctor for over a decade now. And he had been with me through a previous miscarriage. And even in that, he called every day for 10 days. He is just a very incredible human who went above and beyond as a family doctor to make sure the mental health part and the emotional support was there, as well as the medical support.
Sara, I hope this isn't too personal of a question, but were you, like, you get this news, but were you worried about, like, your own physical health at all, or how were you feeling?
I was more worried about my mental health. Physical health kind of went to the back burner at that point. I was more worried about if I had chosen to carry Everett to term, what that would do to my mental health. That was a big discussion, since the outcome wasn't going to be any different regardless. And then, but also the emotional impact of making that choice to move forward in that moment is really difficult. So it was more about navigating the mental health aspect. There was definitely physical health aspects that came later, but in that moment it was more about the mental health stuff for me. I was pretty numb about all the medical, physical stuff that was about to happen.
Were you worried about Sara?
Again, more from the mental health perspective. we are aware of people, like in our sort of, not in our immediate community, but that made different choices than we did, that chose to carry to term and things like that, and we know that had a lot of impact. But I mean, it's more of a like, okay, how are we going to deal with this? We really wanted that baby, and we were so excited, and there's, it was like, I think the doctors, like I say, were very clear, and I no, at that point I was not worried medically about Sara. It was all mentally, and what was going to happen to our relationship with this. So
How then did Empty Arms sort of step in and with Jasmin and Brie, like how did they, what did they do on the day or leading up to?
Well, Dax can answer the first part because he talked to them on the phone. I didn't.
yeah,
Any
so
of the phone calls.
I actually, so I'm the one who booked the appointment in the end, and I was the one who made the call to Empty Arms. Because at that point, like, we didn't have that much information about like what was going to happen and what we were going to do once we went into the hospital, like aside from that we were going to induce labor. But they sort of walked us through it, about what would happen. Jasmin was very clear that we could call her throughout the process. When Everett was eventually born, it was at 3 o'clock in the morning, and 2:54, and I called her almost immediately afterwards. It was like she just instantly became this point of contact. I called my parents and I called her, and they told us like that they would come in. They brought us a kit. They suggested things that we should pack. She asked if we had things like blankets or stuffed animals ready and stuff like that, and said, okay, well, I want you to take some of that stuff in with you, so that you'll have it. Yeah, they said, do you want, we can have a photographer come in, and we initially said no to that, but then eventually changed our minds. Although at that point, they didn't have anybody available, but it's fine. Like, I mean, they said, well, this is something you're probably going to want, and that is something we did decide later. Overall, it was nice to have things to do, next steps, and sort of an idea of what was going to happen. And then, eventually, it was very early in the morning when Jasmin came. I mean, we'd had a few hours. She brought us a box full of all kinds of things that we might want for Everett. She brought the stuffed animals. We sort of went through a few rituals with him that kind of helped us, I think, just, even though he wasn't there in his body, it just helped us let him know how loved he was and how much we'd wanted him. I mean, he was born with perfect little hands and feet and a perfect little face, and it was so hard to believe that, it wasn't going to happen. And then, so we went through things like, we read him a story, we changed his diaper, we put him in pajamas, he had, we held him, he was in a nice little hat. I believe Empty Arms has raised money over the years that they actually buy chillers. They're called cuddle cots. So that he was physically in good condition throughout the process. We had a few people close to us who came in and had the chance to hold him and see him. And yeah, so you just, you don't have to go through that sort of misery alone. Yeah, we did eventually have photos and stuff. I think one of the most special things was Jasmine actually suggested, here, why don't you, we gave him a bath, she brought in a whole kit of essential oils in different scents, and she said, pick one that you don't have any other association with. Pick one.
Which was hard,
because we always
I have a lot.
But so she said, okay, I want you to go through these things, and I want you to pick something that you don't have any other sense memory for. And then that's what we added to the bathwater, as we cleaned him and changed him into the pajamas that he would be in when we finally left the hospital, and that kind of thing. And then, we dried him with the towel, and so, and then now we have all those things preserved in a Ziploc bag, and you can, when you open that bag, which we have done on his birthday, that stuff, remembering going through that ritual, is a very positive memory for us. You're going through a miserable time, but knowing that you love that baby as best you could in the time that you had, and that you went through that stuff is some small comfort in that dark spot. Yeah.
Thank you, Dax.
We got to weigh him and do his measurements and all the things that you would do, or that you do when you have a baby full term. And they brought things that were his size. This was his stuffed rabbit that they brought in. They let you take their handprints and footprints, so we have them on our wall, the ink ones, and then in our little memory corner we have his other stuffed animal with his hands and footprints in, it's kind of clay. It looks like clay, but it's not really. It's like a polymer. But they supplied all of those things. We didn't have to think of any of these things. They supplied clothes that were the right size, because nobody expects to have a baby that small. He was just over a pound, so very, very tiny. So no one expects to have to clothe a baby that small or anything like that. So they made it that we had all these things available to us. They also supplied us with the information for planning a funeral if we wanted, or an interment. There's a children's garden actually in Woodlawn Cemetery behind the house here, where you can inter the babies if you want, and it's all children that have been lost too soon. But we chose to keep Everett here with us right now, so. But it's always there in the future, and they took care of cremation services. They supplied us with a choice of urn. We didn't have to think or do much in that regard, other than say yes or no in the moment. And when Dax said we didn't have a photographer, luckily one of my very good friends is a photographer, and she couldn't come, but she had a second shooter that she took with us that came and had never done anything like that, and was it was very hard for her, but she did a very wonderful job, and she still reaches out, and we still talk, so.
September 22nd was his birthday?
Yes.
Is that, yeah. Okay. How long were you able to spend with him?
Well, because I ended up getting quite sick in the hospital, which has been my story of pregnancy since, we had Everett with us for 2 days, or close to 2 days, yes. Because I ended up hemorrhaging and having surgery, so Dax was alone with our moms and Everett during that time. But because I was there, they allowed us to have him with us for the entire time that I had to be in the hospital.
I thank you for walking me through all of that, because I know that's not easy. And as I look on your coffee table right now, there's so many memorable, like you said, like symbols and things full of meaning from your son. I like when you're looking out at all this, like what goes through your mind?
Lots of memories and feelings from that day. We generally pull it out on his birthday. Now that we have a daughter, we read her that book every year on his birthday.
On the night you were born?
Yeah. On the Night You Were Born by Nancy Tillman.
We actually both chose art from that book, from portions of it that resonated with us, and had them converted into tattoos. So yeah, there's.
Can you tell me what's on your arm?
Yeah, I have 3 geese tattooed, and because there's a quote in the book that goes, so if ever you wonder just how special you are, and you wonder who loves you, how much and how far, just listen for geese flying high or honking high in the sky. They're singing a song to remember you by. And I just like the way that it looks like a young geese with his parents flying behind it. And yeah, I do. I do now when I hear the geese, migrating every year when they're leaving or coming back. There's always that reminder. I remember very early on, actually even before I got the tattoo, walking to work. I work at Innovation Place, and I used to walk across the train bridge every day, and I remember like having to stop and have a quick cry on the bridge because, it was probably, I don't know, middle or end of October, and I just remember having that moment, hearing birds call, and it's nice knowing that I'll have that association with him forever, and it's because somebody had the forethought to put together a package like this, and like we didn't know at the moment, but that book now has given me something that I'll be able to reflect on with him forever.
Sorry, I was that was very powerful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Dax, like the fact that you just mentioned that someone had the foresight to do all this, because like when you're in the moment, like I can't imagine everything that's going through your minds and in your hearts in the moment. Like was it when you reflect back on it, like, and you think of what Empty Arms did for you guys and your family, like does it sort of like I'm amazed at at everything that they did and how how do you guys feel reflecting back on it?
Well, immense gratitude because it all came from their losses of having lost children and not having support or help in the way they would have wanted. And then that they had the ambition and to take that and make it into something where they could help other parents through it. Because we're really lucky in Saskatoon that we have that. There's lots of places where that's not a thing. We talk to so many parents who have had these losses, people in our family that we didn't even know had had such difficult losses that they didn't have support, that their babies were kind of just taken away from them after the babies passed, that they didn't really get to say goodbye or have a funeral or create any of those special memories. So I think all in all, just mostly gratitude for the fact that they gave us the gift of being able to create those memories and have as good of experience as possible in an unimaginably difficult situation.
One of the amazing things was like in the aftermath of losing Everett, I think we came through it in such a way that we had like a reasonably positive experience under the circumstances, like Sarah said. I mean, like as good as you can have it. And like there's, for me there was a reticence at the beginning, like a resistance to to call a stranger and invite them to share in this terrible personal grief. You know, the idea, even though that I knew the service was centered on this, the idea of making that phone call was hard at first, but I had the moment. Yeah, we trusted Chantel, which helped, and then I think some of it was just the momentum of, okay, I've already made the terrible call to schedule it. How bad could this one be? But finding out in the aftermath of Everett coming through it and being able to talk about it and sort of being public about it, we found out how much other loss was out there, like Sara said. That, you know, people came to us and they said, you have no idea how much I wish I had been able to do that when I lost my baby. Or finding out that there's so many mothers who never got to see or hold, or, you know, people who experience loss even like right up to a week before, you know, these babies' births. You hear all these stories from all these people, and so I think that's one more reason that I think we're happy to be talking about this today, is for anybody who goes through it in the future, you might feel resistant to make that call, because it's hard, but I feel like the not knowing would be so much worse.
You bring up such a great point in terms of how public you have been in terms of your story and Everett's story, and Sara, it was you that reached out to me and said, like, have you heard of this organization before? I think they would be really interesting to focus on the podcast, and I'd never heard of it before. And so again, both of you being willing to share your story leads to all this. Like, is it like were you at all hesitant to get your story out there a bit, or was it a moment where it's like, I feel like this needs to be known throughout our community in terms of the work that Empty Arms does and what you've been through?
I think I wasn't hesitant. I'm pretty open and vulnerable. I'm a yoga teacher and have taught about emotional balance and anxiety and dealing with depression and all that stuff for a very, very long time. But I think a big part of that was our yoga community at the time, which has changed. You were a part of that community at the time. It made it really easy to talk about it and really easy to have a safe space, because that community was a safe space, and those were the people that showed up, then brought food and helped raise money so that I could be off work, because being an independent contractor, I didn't have a way to do that otherwise. And there's no bereavement leave for a lot of people that lose a baby at this age, which is unfortunate. So this made it very possible. Sharing the story with our community seemed really natural, at least for me. And then the more we heard, like, my grandmother lost a baby at 23 weeks, and we didn't know that until this happened. I didn't know that part of her story, and she was alone and had to go down to the nursery, because it was different then, and say goodbye by herself, because my grandpa was home with the other two children. And we heard that story, and then a couple of our aunts shared stories and that we had no idea about, where they didn't even really get to say goodbye. And so I thought it was really important that people know that this is an option, and that for cities that don't have it, that maybe if they're passionate about it, that it's something that they can look into starting and reaching out to people like Jasmin and Bri, who started that here. And every year we try to do some kind of little fundraiser around Everett's birthday to support them. There's lots of things that they do, but it never was hard for me to talk about it. I mean, hard, yes, emotional, but not, the decision to talk about it was never difficult. I think sharing people's stories is a really important part of being human and knowing that we all suffer and go through things that need support.
And I just think too, the fact that you mentioned when you start to share your story and experience what you both went through, that you started to hear like from your own family that they had been through this as well. It's like I I don't know. I don't know what that says about family, but the fact that they had to go through this alone, but then okay, now I finally feel comfortable to tell my story. I don't, yeah, there's not a question there. I just find that really interesting.
Well, I think for a lot of people, there's shame around losing a child, even though it's very often outside of your control. I think that there are people out there that will make you try to feel shame, like you did something wrong in your pregnancy. I think there's a lot of, I mean, there is a whole culture around pregnancy and how you should be during that period and how you should feel, and so when you experience a loss, you go through it. I think there's a whole different, I mean, we talk about in men, like the whole idea of compartmentalizing and not talking about it. There's a whole mythos out there about like waiting until you're past 12 weeks pregnancy and then it's like safe beyond there to tell people, right? And that if you lose a baby before 12 weeks that you should like just keep it to yourself. And that I I think it's insidious. And you know, like I won't lie, sometimes in telling my story, like when I went back to work, people would be asking. People didn't know. Like it wasn't like my bosses shared. I just told them, and I said I'm not coming back for a while, and they were very
Your bosses were
supportive. That yeah, they were fantastic. There was no, it was just okay, come back when you're ready. But then in sharing my story with people when I went back, there certainly were like absolute looks of horror on some people's faces of like, oh my, I can't believe you're sharing in this detail. And I was like, okay, if this is too much, I can stop. But and you go through that, and it's because some of it was like, the opposite of the yoga community, where people had been so receptive to hearing about it. Mm-hmm. And we just spent weeks of having people come and visit, and sharing and sort of processing some of that stuff. So maybe it was just habit, but yeah, you do second guess when you share with certain people and they don't, and you can kind of see that look. Nobody was mean about it, nobody was like rude, but there was certainly like a look on some people's face of, I can't believe he's telling me this. And so I can't imagine what it's like for people who are already feeling shame, where I was not in that space at all. I am rambling.
Oh, you're Dax. Dax, trust me, you're doing amazing.
But yeah, like I said, we'd never have found out. I don't think we ever would have found out about friends and family, or like, yeah, letting, and like, there was so much unprocessed emotion even in the people that we were hearing it from, like the people who had kept it from themselves or like to themselves. And there were people, and you'd hear from them, can't believe I'm telling you this. I've never told this to anybody before, but it's just like, it's because we've been there, or like because we are, it's comforting to you because you know that, okay, there are people that, yes, they haven't had this exact experience, but like there are people in my life that know a bit about what this feels like.
When it's catching ourselves when people ask us, like, how many kids do you have? And whether we say we have 2 or we just say we have a daughter, because you can tell they aren't going to be receptive or don't want to I'm trying, or don't want to hear that part of the story. But I'm trying to always say two, because that's the reality. We have two kids. And something I've learned or realized is that if people lose a child later in life, so I've known lots of people who have passed when I was a teenager, or friends and family that have lost kids. My great aunt lost her son when he was 20. And she reached out right away and said, I'm sad you had to join this club with me. But we never hesitate to say his name. In fact, we talk about him all the time. A lot of people hesitate when it's a baby. They don't treat it in the same way, which is really hard for the parent. They don't know that it's actually easier if you say their name. It's actually easier if you talk about them as if they existed, because they did, and not as if they were just a passing thing, because he'll always be a part of our life. We talk about him with Brogan. She knows as much as a 2-year-old can that she has an older brother named Everett, and that he's a part of her life in whatever way. We make up stories where there's the two of them in it, and she'll ask for those stories. I don't remember them ever, so they're always a different iteration, but...
Well, because, I mean, how do you measure the impact of a person, right? Sarah and I are not the same people. Our parents are not the same people. Our siblings are not the same people because he existed. Even for that brief flicker, that 20 weeks that he lived inside of Sarah, he had impact. We changed our whole lives based around his existence. And so, yes, he is not here walking and talking, but he had impact.
We got married on his due date.
His due date here in this living room. I proposed in the hospital, actually, because it was something that I'd obviously been thinking about, but because I looked at Sarah and I said, how could I not be with somebody that I lived through this with? That, we are so permanently connected by that moment, and I never want to be with anybody else. Because nobody is ever going to understand me again but this person. Yeah, and it was such a no-brainer to get married like 4 months later. But
we've been friends for a decade and had lived together for a few years at that point, so
there's a little bit of context there, but
a little bit. But
I mean, it's not like it was a one-night stand resulted in a baby, and then we were like, but
no, thank you for sharing that. You both have been beyond generous with your time and inviting me to your home and telling me about Everett. Is there anything else you would like to say about your son, or about your family, or about the work that Empty Arms continues to do? Is there and that you would like the community and all the podcast listeners out there to know? Anything else that you'd like to say?
If you get a chance to support Empty Arms, I would say do it, even if it's a small donation, because you notice a fundraiser. They have fundraisers throughout the year, which I'm sure Jasmin and Bri will talk more about. But I guarantee that everybody knows somebody that has lost a child that they would have been able to benefit from Empty Arms, because I believe it's from conception to 2 years old that they help through the grieving process. And so if you can help somebody in that way, it's life-changing. It changes the way that grief is looked at. It changes the way that relationship with the child is. And also, if people are listening, talk to parents about their children, living or dead. They have impacted their life, and they're a part of that family, whether they are sitting with them or not.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sara said. Empty Arms is a wonderful organization. I will say that the one piece that's always felt like it was missing, we were presented with all the possible funeral options for Everett, but the one that was missing was actually the ability to send him to the university, so that he could be of help in research and studying birth defects, which is an option that I'm passionate about. I believe that people, especially with in the case of a birth defect, or people who are afflicted with illnesses and disease, who are terminal, I believe that there's an onus to humanity to give yourself to research. My grandfather did it, and was honored for it by the university. I spoke to them during the ceremony given by the medical students about whether or not the donation of Everett's body would have been of value to the medical school, and the doctor in charge said yes, absolutely. And I said, well, then you guys should really set up a program. Like, it seems odd to me that you have a perinatal ward, but there is no contact or no line of communication set up where this could have been done. So I don't think it was on Empty Arms to do that. Yeah, and I'd really like to see that be an option, because in the case of a rare defect like Everett's, if they're, who knows what sort of early detection stuff can be developed. That might help other lost parents in the future to prevent what we experienced.
Thank you both so much. Sara, thank you for reaching out to me, for getting all this, this ball rolling, and thank you both for sharing your story. Like, Dax, I just met you, and when you were telling the story about the meaning behind your tattoo, I just wanted to put down my microphone and give you a hug, but don't know if we're at that stage yet. But I really appreciate you both sharing your story. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
My thanks again to Dax and Sara Irons for sharing their story and their memories of Everett on the podcast. A reminder that you can learn more about Empty Arms by listening to the previous episode of YXE Underground and by visiting emptyarmspls.com. I would also like to acknowledge that this interview was conducted on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. My name is Eric Anderson. I host, produce, and edit this local independent podcast. Thank you all for listening so much, and we'll talk to you soon, Saskatoon.